The chandeliers cast a soft gold glow over the ballroom, catching on crystal glasses and diamond bracelets. Laughter rolled easily through the crowd, loudest near the Steinway, grand at the center of the room. The billionaire host stood there, tuxedo sharp, voice sharper, basking in the attention. Behind him, a janitor in a pressed gray uniform wiped the piano's polished lid. Almost absent-mindedly, he pressed a few gentle notes, checking the dust between the keys. The melody was soft. Careful, the billionaire turned. "Get your filthy hands off my piano." The words cracked across the room. He shoved the janitor hard enough to send him stumbling into a velvet rope post. A wine glass tipped. Red spread slowly over white marble. Phones froze mid-air. Conversations died. The janitor steadied himself, one hand against the rope stand. He didn't speak, and in that heavy silence, the story really began. The gala was held in the Grand Monarch Hotel, a century-old Manhattan landmark where presidents once slept and oil barons once negotiated. Tonight, it hosted tech investors, senators, foundation heads, people who moved money the way most people moved furniture. Cameras lined the entryway. Donor names shimmered on a gold-plated display near the bar. At the center of it all stood Victor Hale, the billionaire who loved to remind interviewers he'd built everything from nothing. He repeated that phrase often. From nothing. It had become both shield and sword. He guarded his image fiercely, corrected waitstaff publicly, and treated the Steinway like a trophy he'd personally carved from the forest. The janitor he'd shoved was Leonard Brooks, 68, part-time night staff, reliable, quiet, the kind of man management described as no trouble at all. What the room didn't know, what Victor Hale certainly didn't know, was that Leonard had trained at Juilliard, that his hands had once moved across keys inside the White House East Room, that he'd performed at inaugural celebrations for 3 presidents, Republican and Democrat alike. He stepped away when his wife's treatments consumed their savings. He never returned to the stage. Guests saw a uniform. They didn't see legacy. And back in the ballroom, Victor Hale was still speaking. Victor Hale didn't lower his voice. "You think because it's after hours you can just pretend," he said, glancing around as if inviting agreement. A few donors laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was easier. Leonard adjusted the sleeve of his gray uniform and gave a small nod. "I was just checking for dust near the keys, sir." "Dust," Victor repeated, like it offended him personally. He pulled a white silk handkerchief from his jacket pocket and began wiping the keyboard himself, slow and exaggerated, as though disinfecting something contaminated. The gesture drew more attention than the shove had. A photographer nearby snapped a few shots. Assuming it was some staged, candid display of ownership, Leonard didn't move to stop him. His hands rested lightly at his sides. One thumb brushed the slight indentation on a middle E, worn smooth from years of use, muscle memory. His breathing stayed even. Around them, guests studied their drinks, their phones, the ceiling. Anywhere but the scene unfolding in front of them. Victor glanced at the crowd, sensing their discomfort. Then he smiled and decided to make it bigger. Victor lifted a champagne glass and tapped it with a fork. The thin chime sliced through the room. "Let's make sure staff knows their place," he said lightly. A ripple of applause followed. Polite, uneven, more reflex than support. He turned back to Leonard. "Go on." Back to the mop. Leonard met his eyes for half a second, then nodded once. No argument, no flare of temper. Just a quiet acknowledgement, as if he'd been asked to step aside on a crowded sidewalk. As he turned away, a donor near the piano chuckled. "What were you playing anyway?" Leonard paused. "Debussy." Victor barked a laugh. "Doubt you could spell it." A few guests joined in, softer this time. Cameras tilted subtly. Someone near the bar lifted a phone higher, pretending to check a message. By the doorway, the hotel manager stood stiff, fingers knotted together, saying nothing. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier, and from somewhere near the front row of tables, a woman's voice broke the tension. Near the front table, an older woman had risen halfway from her chair. Silver hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, posture still formal despite her years. She'd been watching Leonard with an intensity that didn't match the laughter around her. "That can't be," she murmured. No one heard her the first time. She stepped forward, heels soft against the marble, weaving past a cluster of donors who barely noticed. Her eyes never left his face, not the uniform, not the posture, the face. She moved closer, searching, as if reaching back through decades. "Mr. Brooks," she said, clearer now. Victor's smile faltered. "Do you know him?" he asked, irritation creeping in. The room quieted again, but this silence carried weight. Expectation. Confusion. Leonard stopped walking. For a moment he didn't turn. Then slowly, he did. Leonard inclined his head, polite as ever. "Yes, Mom." The woman turned not to him but to the room. Her voice carried without effort. "This man played at my husband's inauguration dinner." The words settled heavily across the marble floor. No one moved. "He performed at the White House," she continued, steady now. "Twice more after that. State events. East Room." A low murmur began, uncertain at first. A man near the bar was already scrolling through his phone. Another guest leaned over his shoulder. Within seconds, a grainy video surfaced, 3 decades old. A younger Leonard seated at a grand piano, the presidential seal visible behind him, applause filling a room far grander than this one. Victor's smile didn't disappear all at once. It thinned, tightened, then simply failed. Leonard looked at the piano, then back at Victor. "I was only making sure it was still in tune." He said it gently. No edge, no triumph. And just like that, the room began to rearrange itself. The shift was subtle at first. A donor cleared his throat and stepped a few inches away from Victor. Then another followed. Space opened around him like a tide pulling back. The hotel manager hurried forward, face pale. "Mr. Brooks, I am so sorry," she said, voice unsteady. Her hands hovered, unsure whether to shake his or simply fold in front of her. Victor forced a thin smile. "Well, I didn't know," he began. Glancing at the phones now angled in his direction, Leonard met his eyes. "You didn't ask." The words weren't sharp. That's what made them land. Across the room, screens glowed. The shove, caught from 2 angles, was already looping. Guests whispered behind manicured hands. "Did he say filthy? Is this being live-streamed?" Victor's shoulders eased downward, not in relief but in weight. His jaw tightened. He looked smaller somehow, tuxedo and all. For the first time that evening, he had nothing to say. And outside those ballroom doors, the story was spreading fast. Within 48 hours, the clip was everywhere. Morning news panels replayed the shove in slow motion. Commentators didn't shout. They didn't need to. The words "filthy hands" scrolled in clean white text beneath Victor Hale's face. Civil rights advocates called it what it was: public humiliation rooted in prejudice. Not a misunderstanding, not a joke taken wrong. The Grand Monarch Hotel released a formal apology by sunrise the next day. It named Leonard Brooks directly, promised accountability, promised change. Victor's company board convened an emergency meeting that same afternoon. By evening, 2 major investors had issued statements distancing themselves. Then more followed. Old interview clips resurfaced, offhand remarks about polish and presentation that sounded different now, sharper, less accidental. A formal internal investigation was announced into workplace culture complaints previously buried in files. Sponsors quietly withdrew from his Tech Foundation's scholarship program. The pressure mounted without theatrics, steady and corporate. 3 days later, Victor Hale stepped down as CEO, pending review. Leonard received a written apology, compensation, and an invitation to headline a benefit concert at the hotel, fully paid. He declined the money, accepted the piano. He asked that every dollar raised go to music programs in underfunded public schools. The hotel implemented mandatory anti-bias training and established clear staff protection protocols. Policies printed, signed, enforced. And as headlines faded, something quieter remained. 3 weeks later, the ballroom looked the same, but it felt different. The Steinway stood at the center again, polished to a soft glow beneath the chandeliers. This time, Leonard Brooks approached it in a black tuxedo, not a gray uniform. No mop bucket waited in the hallway. No whispered jokes followed him across the marble. He sat, adjusted the bench by an inch, and let his fingers rest on the keys. Debussy filled the room, gentle and assured. No one spoke, no glasses clinked. The audience leaned forward as if the notes required careful handling. His hands moved steadily over the ivory, pausing for a breath over the same worn middle E. The indentation was still there. Along the far wall, The gold sponsorship plaque had been replaced. Victor Hale's name was gone. When Leonard finished, the silence held, then rose into a standing ovation. He bowed once, calm as ever, and afterward, people began asking themselves harder questions. Sometimes the loudest person in the room carries the least weight. Volume can imitate authority, but it can't replace character. That night proved something simple and uncomfortable. Dignity doesn't need to introduce itself. It doesn't shove. It doesn't humiliate. It waits. How often do we measure worth by clothing, titles, or who seems to own the room? How many people stayed silent in that ballroom because power looked polished and expensive? It's easy to recognize injustice after the video goes viral. Harder to recognize it when you're standing 3 feet away, so ask yourself honestly. If you had been there watching it unfold in real time, would you have spoken up? Or would you have waited for someone else? Tell me what you think, because real power doesn't shove. It listens. This story moved you. If it reminded you why dignity still matters, take a moment to support the channel. Like this video so more people see it. Subscribers if you believe in accountability, consequences, and stories where character wins in the end. And share your thoughts in the comments. I read them. I want to know what you would have done in that room. These conversations matter. I'll see you in the next story.